Max. By the way, I love Dementis's Roman chariot motorcycle trio. That was just brilliant. I don't know how practical that would really be in the desert, but on
Not
cinema,
very.
it looked fantastic.
You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures. Oh, what a hit.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show. My name is James, joined as ever by my good friend Steve. And this episode, we are talking George Miller's Furiosa, a Mad Max saga.
Hey, James, let's talk Furiosa.
Let's do that. Okay, 2015's Mad Max Fury Road was my favorite film of that year. I'm sure it was one of your favorites as well. And obviously, even that movie, I think, ahead of it being released, there was a certain degree of trepidation about, do we really need another Mad Max movie? Is this a reboot? How is this going to fit in? And obviously, it became the phenomenon that it is. It won 6 Oscars and was critically lauded absolutely everywhere. It was one of the greatest action movies of all time. And now, 9 years later, we have a prequel, which essentially just lays out the origins of the character brought to life by Charlize Theron in the first movie, here by, for the most part, Anya Taylor-Joy. So, Steve.
James, I went into this with a little bit of trepidation because I did like Mad Max Fury Road so much. I mean, I saw the original Mad Max back in like 1982. I remember seeing The Road Warrior first and then finding out that it was a sequel. And then my friends and I were scouring where how do we see the original one? And because Road Warrior 2 or Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior was such a hit, some of the local theater chains brought back the 1979 original film. And so we got to go and see it on the big screen probably in 1982. So, I mean, I've been following George Miller's Mad Max Chronicles since I was 17 years old. I'm 57 now. And this road just keeps winding for me. Mad Max Fury Road that came out in 2015 has moved into my top 10 films of all times. And you can appreciate I am not an action genre. That's not my favorite genre. Car chases do not do it for me. But what George Miller infuses into these characters, infuses into the story, so much is told without dialogue. And I'm a dialogue person. When Tom Hardy and Charlize Theron look at each other, I'm hearing words between them and no one's speaking. It was a brilliant film. Coming back to, I did have the sense of trepidation. How is Anya Taylor-Joy going to fill the shoes of Charlize Theron? She managed to do it. I think by and large, I might not enjoy this film as much as Fury Road, but it's one of the best prequels I've ever seen.
That's okay. Big words, but yeah, I'm pretty much on the same page as you. I want to sort of show my hand quite early on because I don't think we're going to gain anything by holding back. I was really, really, really impressed with this movie. I didn't expect much, to be honest. It's one of those films where I was like, I'm not sure if we need it. Is it unnecessary? Whatever. But I had an open mind. Let's see what we do. Certainly, there is a potentially potent story in there. When we meet Furiosa in Fury Road, she's clearly been through a lot. So I was like, okay, well, if you're able to do that in a way that feels organic, in a way that feels honest, sort of unlike how something like sort of the Han Solo movie felt obliged to go, hey, you want to know how he got his jacket? You want to know how he got his gun? It's like, no, I don't care about that. That's not important backstory. Tell me about the character. And what this movie does is it really tells you about the character. And it creates a version of the world that is slightly different, something we haven't quite seen, with the green place. And we get to finally see Gastown and the bullet farm that are mentioned in Fury Road. And it's not afraid to spend time with characters we already know, but at the same time, it's also feels committed to introducing new characters. I mean, not least Dementis, played by Chris Hemsworth, who I thought was absolutely great. I think outside of Thor, he hasn't always really succeeded, or certainly the films he's been in haven't always really succeeded. But here, I think uglying himself up with the big fake nose and the huge wig and the beard and everything. I think it kind of gave him carte blanche to do whatever he want, and it was sort of this bizarre cross between a kind of bogan Aussie guy from the outback, cross between a kind of almost sort of mythic religious figure. He kind of almost looked like he'd stepped out of Last Temptation of Christ at some moments.
Yeah.
There was a very sort of weird look about him. But then he's also not afraid to be absolutely despicable,
Yeah.
in his
Yeah.
actions.
Absolutely.
Even if they do try and justify it with a little bit of his own backstory. And I thought it
Yeah.
was great. It was a really good opportunity for him to do, throw caution to the wind, do something completely different. And I thought he did a great job.
Well, I was afraid, James, that the Chris Hemsworth addition to Furiosa was going to mirror what they did with Tina Turner back in the original trilogy, where, okay, now we've got some traction on this franchise. Let's bring
Mm,
in an A-lister, an A-star. And of the original trilogy, Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome is arguably the weakest film
without a
in the
doubt.
bunch by and large.
Inarguably. Yeah.
And so I thought, oh God, this is where they're going. This is the new Tina Turner, and we're going to get kind of a facsimile of Mad Max. We're not going to
Mm.
get a real Mad Max Saga. I was wrong. Chris Hemsworth, I won't echo everything you just said, but I thought he did a brilliant job, and he was a wonderful addition to the story.
I mean, the great gamble in a way about this movie is that basically Max isn't in it at all. You get one glimpse
Oh,
of
you get,
someone,
yeah, I was going to say,
but
but
it's there just as
yes,
a kind of as a
it's
gag
it's
almost.
a wink. It's a wink.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the fact that they've dared, quote unquote, to make a Mad Max movie without Max in it, uh, shows the willingness, the confidence that George Miller has with his environment and with the universe that he has created. What I did enjoy about this one is that it really made the effort to ground it back in Australia again.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
felt the Fury Road, they'd kind of forgotten that it
Yeah.
was supposed to
Yeah.
be Australia.
It was a
It's
nameless, faceless place somewhere in the wasteland. But
yeah, but here they took the time to sort of go back over the history of what had
Mhm.
happened. It has a
Yeah.
kind of prologue where it's like, there'd been a
Well,
war and that we ran out of gas, ran out of petrol,
they
and
even utilized stock footage from Road Warrior, where they kind of do
yeah,
that prologue to take us from the first Mad Max and let us know the apocalypse has happened and this is what it looked like. They reused some of that to just kind of reestablish itself.
yeah, because I think it's Road Warrior, isn't it, that opens with that kind of sort of newsreel
Yes.
montage.
Mhm.
I'm very envious of the fact that you saw them that way round. I mean, I saw Mad Max 2 first, as I think
Mhm.
a lot of people did. Um, but I saw it as Mad Max 2.
Yeah.
And obviously I saw it a bit later. I probably saw it in the late 80s, maybe even early 90s, probably late 80s, something like that.
Yeah.
But to have been part of that initial wave where, yeah, Mad Max 2 was the film that got better distribution and did open in the US
Yeah.
first. So they had to retitle it The Road Warrior.
Mhm.
And they dubbed it as well, didn't they?
They
Get rid of
did.
all the dodgy Aussie accents.
Yeah.
So to see it that way round and then discover that it's the sequel to this sort of nihilistic Ozploitation sort of road drama almost. And the first Mad Max is much, as
I've
much as
never heard
anything
that
is.
term before, an Ozploitation.
Oh yeah, that's a
I
thing.
love it.
Yeah, that's not
I didn't
my
know that's
that's
the
not my
thing.
phrase. That's definitely a thing. And there were a lot of movies that came out of Australia in the late 70s, early 80s, sci-fi, a lot of dystopian
Yeah.
movies, a lot of action movies,
Yeah.
a lot of exploitation movies, and of which Mad Max was at the time just another one. And it
Yeah.
just happened to be the one that gained traction and that found
Yeah.
an international audience. But I found that here it's almost like they're obviously sort of aiming for a second trilogy, I
Mhm.
think, but it feels like they made Road Warrior first.
Yeah.
Fury Road is like the Road Warrior of it, and then they're like, okay, now we need the Mad Max, we need the origin story of it,
Yeah.
and so it is paced very differently. So it is
Yeah.
sort of slower, it is more character focused, it is more dialogue heavy than Fury Road is, which is a low bar to clear.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I liked that about it. It had far more story to tell, and it told it in
Mhm.
a confident way.
Right.
It didn't mind sort of slowing down and going, okay, here's what we're going to do now. We're going to take a bit of time, introduce some characters,
Yeah.
develop some motivation. And so I mean, arguably what that means, if they're going to do another trilogy, we have a Beyond Thunderdome to come, which
Yeah.
we might not look forward to. But for now, at
Yeah.
least, I really like how they're sort of building this out.
I want to revisit what I said earlier about how the action can communicate dialogue in a way that I've never seen in a film before, both in Fury Road and in Furiosa. I might have mentioned about 6 months ago, I read Kyle Buchanan's book on the making of Fury Road called Blood, Sweat, and Chrome.
Mm.
I devoured this book, James. I got such an appreciation for George Miller, his singular vision, his ability to make things happen despite the odds. Just an incredible filmmaker. And the reason he's able to communicate so much story in just action. Each war boy has a backstory. George Miller created a backstory for each one of them. They all have their individual stories. They know who they are. They're not nameless, faceless, numbered people in Fury Road. They all have a backstory. That's why he said he was able to make Furiosa, because when they were charting out Fury Road, they had Furiosa's entire backstory. They knew exactly where this woman came from. To the point, one of the anecdotes from the book that I remember that stuck with me was at one point the war boys were fighting with the raiders, on the war on the big truck, and George Miller would say, when he hits you, how do you feel? Do you feel humiliated? Do you feel angered? Like, we're just not choreographing a fight. We are telling a story. What is your reaction to being hit like this? I mean, that's how detailed Miller would be. He would want to curate every scene. I mean, that's why the production time exploded so much. It's a wonderful book to read, how he was able to make that film that the production company was starting to think, oh my God, they're just wasting tons of money sitting out in the desert. And it ended up being not only one of the top grossing films of 2015, but nominated for a Best Picture. I mean, a Mad Max film was nominated for Best Picture. That speaks volumes.
And by all accounts, wasn't far off winning. By all accounts, it was kind of up against The Revenant and then Spotlight, which eventually won. But I think it was one of those years where the vote was split so much that the one that everybody thought was second best ended up kind of winning.
And as we often say in our Every Best Picture series, often the ones that don't win figure more heavily in the zeitgeist of cinema years to come.
And that's certainly true.
Spotlight. Who's talking about Spotlight?
Exactly. As good as it was, and it is a very good journalistic drama.
Good movie, but
no one's talking about it now.
No.
I mean, it's absolutely fascinating, isn't it? That I was just watching an interview with George Miller just the other day, and he talks about how he essentially makes his movies like as if they're silent films. Yeah, he says he makes them like silent films with sound, and so it's so visually driven. And every shot and every frame is trying to tell the story. He doesn't need dialogue. I think it was Road Warrior that famously only has sort of 20 odd lines of dialogue in the whole thing, in the whole movie. And I think he mentioned that Furiosa has just sort of 30 the character has 30 lines of dialogue in the whole movie. And he also mentioned that he had that Charlize Theron, when they were making Fury Road, had essentially the entire script for Furiosa as preparation, as backstory. They had sort of made it all so early on, which is absolutely incredible when you think about it, that he would put so much in, and that he's got such an eclectic sort of back catalogue of movies as well. He makes all of these sort of hyper violent post-apocalyptic movies, and then he makes Happy Feet and Baby Pig in the City. It's such a bizarre sort of personality to be able to kind of create that. And you see the humor in all of his movies, but the fact that he's able to make stuff that is so sort of light and soft and cuddly and warm-hearted, but also stuff that is so just sort of manic and infused by just sort of a relentless sort of it's pure adrenaline pretty much is kind of incredible, really.
Now, according to the book I read that I mentioned earlier, Blood, Sweat, and Chrome, he's just a very solid guy. And it really comes through in his films, because as crazy as he can make the toe cutter in the original Mad Max, and there's just these characters that are so disturbing and so out there mentally. What I really love about these films is there's always this strand of how do we bring society back to a moral compass? How does virtue get reestablished? How do we, and this is what I loved in this film, is when Furiosa has really discarded a lot of her humanity based on very horrific circumstances that have
Mm.
happened to her. It's that it
Yeah.
brings in Praetorian Jack, who becomes this compass, this virtue compass. Like, if you need to find your way back to your humanity, come with me, you know. And I just love that element of the story. It's a theme that goes all the way back to the original Mad Max. So we watch Max kind of degenerate to Fury Road, where he's nearly an animal,
Mm.
and how Furiosa acts just as Praetorian Jack did to Furiosa. Furiosa acts to Mad Max. I can become your true north again. I can give you the compass to help you find your way back to your humanity. And I just love that element in these stories.
Yeah, I liked how it kind of suggests that there might be a sort of potential for romance between the two of them, but it never sort of really jumps in. It never bothers to
Hmm.
indulge the audience with scenes of that, because you feel, in this post-apocalyptic dystopia, there is no time for kind of romance. I mean, obviously it must exist to some degree in order for society to continue any further than with just Immortan Joe's mothers and that kind
Yeah,
of
yeah,
machine for creating war boys. But at the same time, I think that would have sort of derailed the pace of the and the focus of the movie. So I like that he gives you just enough to sort of acknowledge it's there if you want it to be there. You know, they can
yeah,
be platonic, they can be romantic together, but you get it, and we're moving on. And so I
yeah,
kind of I kind of like that. It was I imagine there must have been a temptation to be like, oh yeah,
yeah,
just throw in, something a
yeah.
little bit more just to humanize her all the
Right,
more. But
right.
I understand that Miller's like, the whole point is this is kind of the dehumanization
Yeah.
of the character. So I appreciated that, how they handled that.
Do you see in a follow-up trilogy or a follow-up film kind of completing a trilogy here that they bring Tom Hardy back and Charlize Theron and they do one more go with them because they will have aged, you know, by the time they get around to making this film, probably 12, 15 years. And I just see, because as much as I liked Furiosa, this
Mm.
was a solid, solid film. I still missed the Tom Hardy character in these films, the Mel Gibson characters in this film. I appreciate that he had the cojones to make a Mad Max film without Mad Max, and he did it really well. But having said that, I would love to see Mad Max back in
Mm.
the next film.
I think if they're going to do another one, and chronologically, if it's a sequel to Fury Road, it has
Mhm.
to be Max again. I think
Yeah,
Furiosa's work is done.
yeah.
I imagine there's a temptation for this to be a kind of Furiosa trilogy.
Mhm.
But where she ends up at the end of Fury Road, you're like, okay, well, that's, your story is told, kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And you got to remember, in the bigger picture, this is the Mad Max Saga, so it would make sense whether they get Tom Hardy back or not. Will probably take some doing.
Mhm.
By all accounts, it wasn't, well, as I'm sure you know better than me, it wasn't a fun time. But
It
at the
was
same time,
rough, but they reconciled. They've reconciled,
sure.
you know. Yeah.
And I think it would be problematic on a number of levels if they attempted to do one more without him.
Mhm.
But so we'll see. I mean, I hope
Mhm.
if that's where the story falls in the chronology, I hope it makes sense that they get him back, and so I hope that they do for that.
They could fast forward a few more years and bring Mel Gibson back and really seal it.
I mean, but isn't Mel Gibson so out of favor now that that would just kind of be a bit of a sort of a bit of self-sabotage on behalf of George Miller?
I would I don't know. I don't know if a Mad Max fan is going to care. And I think it may actually sweeten the deal. I would go to Tom Hardy first. I would want to make a movie with
For
Tom
sure.
Hardy. I thought Tom Hardy's amazing as Max. He really filled Mel Gibson's shoes. When you read the book, he was really nervous because now Fury Road is a huge, film and it's recognized. But when it was being made, there was a lot of people saying you cannot replace Mel
Yeah,
Gibson.
I
Mad
remember. Yeah.
Max, Mel Gibson is Mad Max. And Tom Hardy readily admits during that book he felt under pressure to live up to a certain expectation he wasn't always sure he could do. And he said that added to some of the friction that went on with the set because he of kind of his own insecurities of being in that role to begin with, and him being kind of a hyper perfectionist. It really was messing with him, caused him to, come into spats with Charlize Theron.
Mm.
There's a great story. I got to tell it for the audience here. It's fantastic. Where 7 a.m. call, Charlize Theron's in the war rig. Tom Hardy's supposed to be there at 7 a.m. The wives are all there. Everybody's waiting. Sorry, Tom's delayed. He's not coming out yet. Charlize, do you want to come out of the war rig? No, she's just seething because she's already built this thing up against Tom Hardy. Charlize, you sure he's going to be a while? I'm waiting. I'm staying in here. She stays in there for 3 hours. Tom Hardy at 10 o'clock finally comes out. She gets out of the war rig. She goes, find that like $10,000 for every minute he held up this crew, just laid into him. And they said it was kind of like that often on the set. But George Miller goes on to say that their real life arc really mirrored the arc of the story. So at the beginning, when they first meet each other and they literally almost fight to the death, he said that was when they were at their most antagonistic in their relationship on the set. Like it just really came through. By the time that they had reconciled and became friends and partners at the end of the film, they were they've made up in the backstory and they're on set, and everything was fine. So the character arc in the film mirrored their relational arc on real life on the set.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't think you're going to certainly won't see both of them come back. This is why I'm thinking that you're not really going to get like a Furiosa trilogy because by all accounts, Charlize Theron was really pissed when she wasn't allowed to come back for Furiosa. Even
but
though
she subsequently said she understood. You can't de-age. The de-aging technology, that's what Miller said. We would love to have had Charlize, but they could not de-age her in a way that was going to not look silly.
I mean, talking about the technology, it's interesting what they did do because, I was surprised how much of the film, like the first 45 minutes of the film, you've got Elijah Brooke. Is it Elijah Brooke? I want to say it's Elijah Brooke.
It's funny you mentioned that, James, because I looked at my watch when Anya Taylor-Joy finally appeared, and it was like nearly an hour into the film.
I wanted to, and then I just got swept up in it, and I didn't. I was like, oh, because I'm quite conscious of that kind of thing when I watch the movie. I'm like, when there's a big change like that, I'm like, okay, how far in are we? And I normally just have a quick peek at the time, and I thought about it, and then I didn't. All in the space of about a second. But Alila Brown is the actress who plays the young Furiosa. So so it's about an hour of the movie before Anya Taylor-Joy assumes the role, and that's in a 2.5 hour movie. Now, I was kind of amazed. I was sitting there and I'm watching the movie and I'm like, wow, this actress really does look like Anya Taylor-Joy. This young actress. That's some amazing casting. And as it kind of went on, I was like, she's looking like more and more like Anya Taylor-Joy. This is great. And then I subsequently discovered in an interview that Anya Taylor-Joy gave just the other day that's exactly what they did. And then what George Miller did is that he essentially digitally composited both actresses' faces. And the way she tells the story, he's like, she literally had it on a dial. So that at the start of the film, you've got Alila Brown's face, and it's got about 10% Anya Taylor-Joy in there, digitally in there. And then just as it goes along, he's just turning the dial. So by the time you've got Brown's last scene, it's about 80% Anya Taylor-Joy already. So the transition, the sequence where they actually pass the baton from one actress to another, which is when she goes undercover amongst Immortan Joe's people as sort of a junior mechanic type character. The transition is as smooth and as minimal as possible, and I just thought that was absolutely fantastic because subliminally I could kind of tell something was going on, but I didn't. Not knowing ahead of time was actually really great and really helped.
No, I echo everything you said because I subsequently found out about that after I watched it, and I had the same feeling like, man, she really looks like Anya Taylor-Joy. Like, and then it made sense. But seamless transitions is something that Miller seems to do well because I thought this prequel, even at the end, how he seamlessly transitions this film into Fury Road. Like you really, everything he does, and it's not meant to be like almost like you mentioned about Han Solo. Like,
Mm.
oh, let's just have this little gimmick here. You get this feeling like, wow, I could watch this film and go right into Fury Road and watch a 5 hour extravaganza with very minimal need to swap out a disc, you know?
Well, absolutely. You know, it because it does. It's funny you bring up Star Wars again because it does almost do that Rogue One thing where Rogue One takes you right up to
Yes.
the opening scene of Star Wars, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it kind of does that. You know, it goes right up to. I mean, it's not a spoiler. This is a prequel. It take
No.
you know, the final scene of Furiosa is her basically taking the wives into her
Yeah.
war rig and going, okay,
Yeah.
we've got to get out of here. Which obviously isn't the first scene of the movie of
Yeah.
Fury Road, but it's where we find her once we meet with her. And then I thought it was a really interesting choice over the end credits to include actual sequences from Fury Road. Yeah, I don't know if you stayed through the
Oh yes,
credits.
yeah, no, I did. Yes, yeah,
Yeah, so
yeah.
you know it
Yeah,
basically gives you a kind of a potted
yes,
synopsis of the next movie over the
yeah,
end credits. And I was like, okay, that's an interesting choice. So you're almost kind of like, well, I don't need to sit and watch it now, but it
yeah.
does kind of really sort of give you that moment. I remember there was something I wanted to talk about earlier, which was you were talking about how nervous the studio was about
Yes.
Fury Road when it was being
Yeah.
made, and it's absolutely true. And it took them a long time. He was saying that it took 18 years to actually get it made
Mm.
to begin with. You know, they've been gestating for a long time, and then the shoot took ages. I remember they had to kind of stop start and do it over many years in different places and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so I was a bit worried because clearly that wasn't the case this time.
Yeah.
Clear, Fury Road was
It took much quicker.
such a hit that I mean, it was. I mean, you say much quicker. I mean, it still took 9 years for them to make it, or from one film to the next film. But you get the impression that the studio was essentially like, "How much money do you want, George?
Yeah.
We will
Yeah.
give you carte blanche to do whatever you want." And you often find, in productions like that, where they have all the resources they need at their disposal, the results are less than great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because there is no pressure to be creative
Yeah.
and to innovate on the fly or anything like that, which so many times you hear that all the best decisions, all the best movies come out of a lack of resources rather than an abundance of them,
Right.
to use the vernacular of the movie. And and so again, it was one of the other reasons why I came into this movie going, it's gonna lack that edge
Yeah.
because it has everything at its disposal. And largely that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
And it was a relief. And actually, it probably enabled them to do little tricks like that digital morphing of the
Mhm.
face, which were completely invisible and which were served only to benefit the end product. And so, again, I think that's kind of like my overwhelming sentiment coming out of this movie is just a sense of relief,
Mhm.
really. It's just like, okay, great, this was a worthwhile endeavor. I'm not one of these people who thinks like a sequel sullies the original or a remake sullies the
No.
original. It's like they're completely separate films. You don't have to own them all on your shelf, side by side if you don't want to. You can pick the one you like and ignore the others. That's totally fine. I mean, one of my favorite franchises of all time is the Alien franchise. Half of them are
Mhm.
rubbish. Let's be
Yeah.
honest. Half of them are rubbish, but the great ones are great.
Mhm.
And so I love the whole franchise. Um, and so I think that's how I came out of this one. I was like, it feels of a piece with Fury Road. It does feel like part of that story, but also the time it takes to tell the story mirrors some of the stuff in the original Mad Max. You feel that they're closer to the start of the apocalypse, and the
Mhm.
end time, because in the very first Mad Max, it's happening then. It
Yeah.
hasn't sort of happened. They've run out of gas, and that's
Mm.
about it. Society is starting to crumble just for a lack of resources. You
Mhm.
know, it's not, I mean, Fury Road feels like it's hundreds of years into whatever this future is.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are very few remnants of our society left over. Whereas I thought in Furiosa, particularly in the early sequences, you see a lot more leather and a lot
Yeah.
more vehicles that still kind of look like regular vehicles, and the
Yeah.
technology. I love the bikes. I love that sequence at the beginning where they strip the bike. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
they one of the bike gets hobbled, the war bike or whatever it was called,
Yeah.
and so they strip it for parts and move on, and then the mother catches up to it, and she's like, oh, okay, I can repurpose that and keep going.
Yeah.
Things like that I really kind of appreciated. But yeah, I just liked how close it felt to the present and the
Well,
reality,
I think
particularly at the
part of the
beginning.
reason for doing that is in 2015, we hadn't had Trump yet. There was
That's true.
geopolitical relations in the world were much more solid. There was no Russian issue. There was no China. I mean, things people were getting along still more or less in 2015. I think in 2024, the world that we're in, we are seeing I personally I don't believe we're going to go apocalyptic, but we're seeing kind of a chaotic breakdown of society. Maybe not to the level of Mad Max, but it is more resonant with what's going on. I think people feel it more when they watch this on the screen. They think, and they watch something like Fallout and on Amazon
Mm,
Prime. You start to think something that was just science fiction, speculation now is like, oh, could this really happen? Could
sure.
this really occur?
Well, I mean, in the 70s, there was an energy crisis, wasn't there?
James, before we close this down, I did want to get your thoughts on how did you think Anya Taylor-Joy did in comparison to Charlize Theron? Did she pull it off?
I mean, that's really tough. I don't think Anya Taylor-Joy is quite the actress that Charlize Theron is
Mhm.
yet. I think she's heading that direction, but she's still quite young. Yes, she's been acting for a good decade already, but mainly as sort of young childish characters. She's still
Mhm.
only in her 20s, I think. Um, I think she gave it a damn good swing, and she certainly manages to carry the film.
Yeah.
You're totally with her and committed to her and her journey.
Mhm.
Um, so it kind of works in her favor, because by the time you get to Charlize Theron's incarnation of her, she's been through the ringer. She's so world weary. She has this kind of weight on her shoulder. No, she's still
Mhm.
got both shoulders, hasn't she? And
Yeah.
and I think that lends itself to to an older, more experienced actress. Um, so yeah, by and large, I was surprised at how well she does handle it.
Mhm.
I think there are more characters around her offering support. You have
Mhm.
Praetorian Jack, you have Dementus, as well as Immortan Joe and the People Eater and all these other
Yeah.
characters. So there's a larger ensemble, but right at its heart, yeah, I was pleasantly surprised. She does a really good job, actually.
I won't add anything to it because it's exactly how I feel. I was really thinking Charlize Theron was so perfect for Furiosa. I didn't think this could really work. But for everything you just said, she pulled it off, and I thought she pulled it off well. And I'm glad you mentioned Alien earlier because I think, like Sigourney Weaver's Ripley, Charlize Theron's Furiosa is one of the great female characters of
Mhm.
cinema. I mean, truly a great character. Um, Anya Taylor-Joy, I think, carries the baton for the time that she's there, but I would really like to see a third film. I don't think her story's done. I
Okay.
think I hear what you're saying. There is, if you wanted to end it at Fury Road, you could, but it's the wasteland. Everybody wants that citadel. There's new enemies to emerge. There is crazier weirdos with crazy weirdo names, with different bikes. By the way, I love Dementus's Roman chariot motorcycle trio. That was just brilliant. I don't know how practical that would really be in the desert, but on
Not
cinema,
very.
it looked fantastic.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I was like, that's great. A
Yeah,
chariot pulled by three Harleys. Um,
it's
but yeah, it
And
would
and
it,
those guys in George Miller's production team are going, what if we made a Roman chariot, but instead of horses, it's Harleys? And George is going, do
I
it.
love there's one bike and I'm not sure what you call it, the sort of the stock where the handlebars are attached to was like the head and torso of a mannequin, like a store
Yeah, yeah,
mannequin. And I was just like, that's genius. That's just
yeah.
boys with toys playing around in the props department, but I loved it.
So, James, drawing this to a close, what unit of measurement are we going to use to grade Furiosa?
There's so many things, aren't there? Is there a central MacGuffin?
We could do the Roman chariot Harleys. How many
How
Roman
many
chariot?
Harleys are pulling the chariot that is
Okay.
Furiosa? Let's do
So,
that.
James, I'll let you start it off. How many
Okay.
Harleys are pulling this Roman chariot?
Okay. So as you know, I like to go big, and I don't do halves and anything like that. Um, I thought that as different as it is, and that's all a good thing, that this really does deserve to stand side by side with Fury Road. This felt absolutely of a piece with that movie. Um, is it the mean, lean, taut spectacle that Fury Road is? No, no, it's not.
Mhm.
But I think that many of the reasons how it differs, many of the ways in which it differs, are to its credit and to its benefit. You can never accuse Fury Road of having a plot, let alone a
Yeah.
complicated one, let alone much space for you know, character backstory. It has character development, but not really backstory. This decides to make that decision and go, okay, well, we're going to slow down at times, and we're going to develop characters. We're going to tell you origins and all the rest of it. And I think it really worked. So it's different, but I think it's arguably, as worthy. And for that reason, and it's probably not as rock hard as for Fury. I'm giving away already as for Fury Road, but I'm going all five. I'm
You're
gonna
going to
go.
give all five, really?
I'm gonna go
Okay.
see it in the cinema again for
Yeah.
sure, and let that settle. But for right now, I think I just came out so pumped with such a sense of relief. Love the awe, love the spectacle. George Miller firing on all cylinders. He's lost nothing, and Anya Taylor-Joy so good. Chris Hemsworth so good. I thought he might
Yeah.
be a weak link. He might be over the top. He might be ridiculous.
I thought the
Um,
same. I thought the
but he
same.
totally nailed it. And so for now, it seems almost like an unfair distinction. Because Fury Road is like a rock hard five and always has been since day one. And if I
Mhm.
gave Furiosa 4, the optics of that is like, oh well, it's so far removed. It's a real step down, and I don't think it is a real step down.
Mhm.
I'll go see it again, and that may differ. I may see more chinks in the armor going forward,
Sure.
but for now, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm going all five.
Well
Five
done.
Harleys pulling the chariot
You got
of the movie.
five.
Yes.
Well, I don't know if it's possible to have a half of a Harley pulling a chariot, but because I can give halves, I'm almost on board with you. But because I said I can give a half, I just feel I can't quite give this one a five. And it's not
Sure.
even in comparison to Road. I mean, for me, I am reviewing based on genre, and they are in the same genre. And for me, Fury Road is the pinnacle of what can be accomplished. This it doesn't mean there could never be a five again here, but I just left feeling it's not a five. For
Okay.
me, it's a 4.5. I was trying to vacillate between 4.5, but like you said, I don't want it to sound like you're hobbled by the fact you can't do halves.
Yes.
And so
Because
coming
I
down
think,
from five to
so
four is a big chunk. Yeah.
because I think you're right. I think it probably is a 4.5 movie, but I
Yeah.
don't do halves, so I
Yeah.
won't. And so I'm
Yeah.
gonna round up.
Well, as the half giver of the deep dive movie reviews team, I'm going to give it 4.5 Harleys. I know half a Harley doesn't make any sense, but then Harley's pulling a Roman chariot doesn't make any sense.
There you go.
But I love George Miller. I love what he does. I love the stories he tells. I love the way he tells them. They resonate with my heart. I'm looking for the next one. I'd love to see Tom Hardy, Charlize Theron back again. And that's no diss to Anya Taylor-Joy, who I thought did a wonderful job.
You could pull her in for some flashbacks or something.
Perfect. Actually, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, just hire us, George. We can give you some good ideas. That's what James and I feel about Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga. Well, what do you feel? Did George Miller hit it out of the park, as James and I suggest, or do you feel like maybe it doesn't measure up, that he missed something along the way? We'd love to hear your comments in the comment box below. James?
Yeah, I want to hear about anything that you have to say about Mad Max, the entire franchise. Your own personal relationship with the movies. Like Steve, did you sort of see the American dub of Road Warrior first? Let us know. And anyone who loves Beyond Thunderdome, feel free to wax lyrical about it below.
Till next episode.
Bye-bye.
You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures. Oh, what a hit you would be. You're